We hear a lot about stress in dogs, how to avoid it, how to eliminate it, how to make sure that your dog never feels overwhelmed. But what if I told you a little bit of stress is actually really beneficial for your dog? The right kind of stress can help your dog to be more resilient, to be more comfortable in lots of different situations and actually have a more fulfilling life. In this video, we're going to explore the difference between good stress, bad stress, what science says about the benefits of controlled stress, and how you can use beneficial stress to help make your dog more confident and resilient. And if you haven't seen them already, I've also got videos on how to recognize stress signals in dogs and how not to fall into the trap of over-analyzing stress signals in dogs. If you haven't seen those, check them out. Let's break it down. Not all stress is the same. There's distress, which is bad stress that causes anxiety and fear. And then there's good stress, which is eustress, which can help motivate dogs and improve their confidence and their resilience in terms of dealing with their day-to-day life. Eustress is the kind of stress that we see in a dog that's excited, engaged, or challenged in a way that is going to actually build their confidence. The anticipation of chasing a ball, the satisfaction of solving a training problem or a puzzle toy, or the exciting novelty of socializing in a new environment. On the other hand, distress is the kind of stress we want to avoid. It's overwhelming, it's unpredictable, and makes the dog feel very unsafe. So how do we find the balance? That's what we're going to explore now. So imagine for a while we've got this goodie called a stressor graph. Just bear with me on this. There's no such thing that exists. But this is how we're going to illustrate the different types of stress and how they all fit together. So the ideal would look something like this, where we have null stress down there, which is obviously impossible. It's unless a dog is in a vacuum with zero interaction with anything else, there will never be null stress in a dog's life. We've got eustress, and then we've got distress. Now, somewhere where eustress becomes distress is where we would say the outer limits of the dog's resilience sits. It's obviously impossible to finitely measure this, but it's a conceptual barrier. And throughout the course of the dog's life, we're going to see their mental or emotional arousal or stimulation is going to go through these peaks and troughs. Now, over here is where we sit with eustress. These are surmountable challenges which are defined by choice, and we'll often be able to determine these by the fact that the dog moves towards the stimulus. You'll notice that down here, it is actually important that the dog operates in these areas as well. Otherwise, we end up with dogs that just don't know how to turn themselves off. There's no off switch to the dog. This is often true of working dogs that spend way too much time in eustress or sometimes even distress, and they never spend any time down here, so they actually don't know how to relax or how to chill out. We've got another category over here of distress, which is where the challenges are overwhelming to the dog. And this is often characterized by no choice in the matter, with the dog being pushed towards the stimulus. Now, if you take a look at our examples from earlier on, you'll notice that in both of those distress examples, the dog was actually confined. It was either being held or it was on a lead. And that kind of straight away lets you know the dog is more inclined to be in distress. Does this mean that you should take your puppy out socializing with no lead or anything on so that they can do everything on their terms? Absolutely not. You obviously still have to make sure that the dog is safe. It's your job to keep those guardrails up and also to prevent your pup or your dog from going into the distress range, and keep them in the eustress range where they're putting a little bit of effort into things, but it's not something that they are unable to deal with. So over time, what happens is we'll find that our distress and our eustress boundaries will change. And as a result, we end up with dogs that are more resilient. You'll see now with the range that the dog has to still remain within that comfortable or that desirable eustress boundary is much bigger. So the dog is able to cope with a lot more. They are a lot more resilient in terms of communicating with their environment. The converse is unfortunately true as well. If we spend time with the dog in the distress section of their emotional range, we'll find that over time, their eustress range becomes smaller, and the distress band or category is going to be reached much easier, which means that their resilience has reduced. And this is really the big argument for trying to avoid the dog going into distress as much as possible, because it can actually make them more nervous and more apprehensive in the future. And science backs this up. A recent study in applied animal behavior science found that dogs that were presented with surmountable challenges had better emotional regulation than dogs that didn't. When dogs experience manageable challenges, their bodies release dopamine, a feel-good chemical that enhances a sense of resilience and accomplishment. That's why structured training, enrichment, and controlled exposure to new items are so valuable to dogs. Resilience is not something that a dog is born with. It's something that we have to help them to develop. And the key to doing this is gradual exposure to manageable challenges. For example, let's look at a puppy experiencing a new environment. It's important for us to provide the environment and to make it kind of enticing to the pup, and that will draw the pup towards it. As soon as that starts happening and the pup starts socializing themselves, so to speak, because all we're doing is providing the setup, the pup is the one that's making the decision to go and learn about these new, weird, and wonderful things. That is how we start developing resilience. There was definitely a little bit of stress at first, but the pup worked through it, and it is now definitely in the category of eustress, which is exactly what we're aiming for. This kind of mild stress actually helps develop the resilience, almost like you would work a muscle in the body. You're not going to completely overload it to the point of failure, because you could actually cause injury, but you're going to have a nice controlled, sustained exercise program, which is going to help develop that resilience that later on the dog is able to cope with way more than they were initially. The key here is mild stress exposure. If you put too much stress on the puppy or the adult dog, this immediately moves it into the distress category, where nothing good is going to come of that. You want to keep it at a level where the dog is feeling something, but it's not too much for them to cope with. So how can you introduce eustress into your dog's life to help develop their resilience? First, you can have controlled exposure to new experiences. It's super important not to overface the dog. If you do too much, you could actually cause harm. Go at a slow, steady pace. And I find the safest option is to provide interesting things that the dog has the option of choosing to interact with or not. That way, you know you're never going to push the dog over their comfort level or into the distress range, because the dog is the one making the choice about interaction. Training with some challenges. Impulse control games are great for this, and even games or training exercises where you ask the dog to figure something out. Don't do all of the work for them. They're smart. Let them use their brains. Enrichment activities. Anything related to the nose is really going to activate the dog's brain, and that in itself is going to help develop this resilience. Structured socialization. Really important not to just chuck your dog into a situation that they're going to struggle to cope with. Maybe they don't have the means to be able to do so. They don't have the experience. Again, go slowly, go at your dog's pace, but don't shy away from these situations. Obviously, safety is a major priority, so you're going to always bear that in mind whenever you're doing any activities with your dog, but continue socialization throughout your dog's life. Socialization doesn't stop when your puppy is out of their puppy socialization period. It can continue right through a dog's life, and even socializing old dogs helps them to maintain their usefulness for much longer. The key here is balance. Enough challenge to stimulate your dog, but not so much that they feel overwhelmed. Remember, the goal here is eustress, not distress. So the next time you see your dog experiencing a little bit of stress, don't rush in to help them. Obviously, make sure that your dog is safe, but don't try and shield them from eustress, from this beneficial stress. You're not doing them a favor. Your job is to protect them from distress. Eustress is a fantastic opportunity for your dog to actually learn how to solve problems, how to be more resilient, which at the end of the day is going to make them a much more content dog. Not all stress is good and not all stress is bad. It's important to know when your dog is experiencing stress. So if you haven't already, check out the other videos on recognizing stress signals in dogs and the danger of overanalyzing stress signals in dogs, this should give you a good handle on knowing whether your dog is in eustress or distress. With this knowledge, you should be able to avoid distress for your dog and keep them with that beneficial stress, that eustress, the stress that's going to help them to be more resilient and more content.